There's a fair amount of biopics that come out every year, but 2023 seems particularly rich in that department. And while we've already seen quite a few of them, ranging from low budget to Christopher Nolan, the end of the year with its impending awards season campaigning is when the genre always comes front and center. So today I want to talk about three very different new biopics: Maestro, Napoleon, and Priscilla. What about them works, what doesn't work, and should you see them on the big screen? Let's start with Priscilla, written and directed by Sofia Coppola. Based on Priscilla Presley's 1985 memoir, Elvis and Me, the movie focuses on her life from the moment she met Elvis Presley at the very young age of 14 to the moment she left him. It's a very lonely coming-of-age story and a fascinating companion piece to last year's Elvis, showing a completely different side of the story. While I won't be spending too much time comparing the two films, it is interesting how strikingly different they are. Where Elvis is big, loud, and flashy, Priscilla has a lot of softness to it, with muted colors and a quieter tone that gets occasionally disturbed by emotional outbursts. The two fill each other's gaps, with Priscilla in particular emphasizing the emptiness left behind when Elvis has left the building, so to speak. Here's where Priscilla succeeds the most, capturing that unstoppable energy of a teen girl in love for the first time. That feeling of infatuation that crosses over into obsession when suddenly nothing else matters. In this case, the intensity of those feelings is amplified by Priscilla being in love with someone who is a larger-than-life star, which is quite literally portrayed in the movie through the exaggerated height difference between the actors, and how quickly her life became all about being who Elvis wanted her to be, rather than figuring out who she actually was. When he's there, his presence fills the room and she looks at him as if she hasn't seen the sun in the month and now it finally appeared. When he is not there, she is almost a ghost wandering around, disconnected from the rest of the world. In a way, this actually plays against the movie because Priscilla feels incomplete as a story and as a person. From the storytelling perspective, we don't really know her outside of this relationship. What was she like before? Was she close with Elvis's family? Did she have friends? How did her life change after she left Elvis? And some of that is covered in the memoir, by the way, and was just left out of the movie. But on a more personal level, who was Priscilla, really, other than a girl obsessed with a larger-than-life star? After 110 minutes of this movie, I'm still not sure, and even though that's kind of the point, it makes the character portrayal seem like it's missing something. Meeting Elvis at such a young age didn't give Priscilla the chance to discover who she was, and the power he had over her stopped her from exploring it during their time together as well. What isn't clear, though, is why this continued for as long as it did, especially after she became an adult and began to understand everything she's missing in this relationship. This is something the book makes a lot more clear, and you understand the dynamic of this weird relationship a bit better. What did she see in him? Why did she feel like he needed her? What made her feel like she's a part of the family? What made the times when she was alone worth it? So if that's something you've been wondering about, I would definitely recommend reading the book as well, because the movie doesn't really make any of that clear and focuses a lot more on the coming-of-age experience in a gilded cage. It also gets into this pattern of her life being exciting when Elvis is there, then Elvis acting out, everyone getting upset at each other, then apologizing, then he leaves, and she waits for him to come back only to repeat this cycle again until she finally decides to leave. Throughout all of this, Priscilla quietly grows up, and Cailee Spaeny does a fantastic job portraying her, by the way, particularly the younger years. But once again, we don't really know her by the end of the movie. We just observe, and it does get a little repetitive. This is an issue I've always had with Sofia Coppola's movies. They're stylistically beautiful, and she's really good at capturing certain moments and feelings without much dialogue, dialogue, but as a viewer, I always feel like she's keeping me at a distance. And with Priscilla, it's the exact same thing, and I was hoping for a bit more from this film. The last thing I'm going to say is that I'm a bit on the fence about Jacob Elordi's performance. There are certain scenes where he really does seem to capture a different side of Elvis, and it feels authentic, but there's an equal amount of scenes where it comes off as an impression and the accent doesn't feel lived in, which took me out of the movie a little bit. In the end, I did enjoy Priscilla, and there's a lot to admire about it. It's beautiful, it definitely transports the viewer to a different decade, and I appreciate that Sofia Coppola didn't feel the need to lecture her audience, instead showing things as they were and letting her viewers draw their own conclusions. But also, I did hope for a more in-depth look at Priscilla as a person and a more complex picture overall. Would I say this is a must-watch in theaters? For Sofia Coppola fans, absolutely. The rest of us can probably wait for it to pop up on streaming. On the completely different side of the spectrum is Ridley Scott's Napoleon, the 2-hour and 38-minute historical epic that tries to capture the rise and fall of one of the most famous historical figures, Napoleon Bonaparte. The movie is, as you can imagine, a lot to digest, from the grand scale of its battles to the volatile French politics and the romance between Napoleon and his wife Josephine, with a pretty equal amount of time devoted to Napoleon's personal life and his military and political career. This one is for everyone who loves a historical epic, and believe me, fans of the genre will have a lot to feast their eyes on. But this is a flawed film, and its flaws are highlighted by the fact that when it is good, it is actually pretty amazing. As a big fan of period pieces, I was really looking forward to this, and I really wanted to love it, but it became clear very quickly that a lot was cut from this movie. One of my first thoughts after the screening was, I really need to see the director's cut of this. So let's get into some pros and cons. First of all, the movie looks gorgeous. The costumes, the production design, the cinematography, it's undeniably a beautifully shot film with a big production budget, and you see that money on screen. This is particularly clear in the battle sequences, as they're some of the best things about Napoleon, but there are also plenty of gorgeous interiors, and the coronation scene alone is a work of art. What's concerning, of course, is that I doubt this movie will do very well in theaters, and then does not do great things for our chances to see a lot more big budget historical epics in the future. But I digress. As far as the performances go, I have to say Vanessa Kirby steals the show. She is Best Supporting Actress Oscar worthy, and she adds so much to this movie. Joaquin Phoenix is good, he always is, but to my surprise, this isn't one of his best performances. Part of it is that there are some comedic line delivery choices that are made that just feel so separate from the rest of his performance that they seem a bit out of place. And maybe that's, once again, something that makes more sense in a longer cut and there is a better balance there, but as is, he just didn't blow me away, and I feel like he should have. Portraying a historical figure like Napoleon should have been one of the biggest achievements of his career, but it's just not. Once again, not saying that he's bad in the movie, and he does have some strong moments, but if I'm being honest, I found Vanessa Kirby to be more memorable. The real issue with Napoleon is that it actually feels like a movie that's been heavily edited. The setup in the first act is pretty choppy. The relationship between Napoleon and Josephine doesn't begin to feel real until the second half of the movie, and some of the dialogue is very rough. Looking at the theatrical cut, it may seem like Ridley Scott was a lot more interested in the big historical moments than he was in the personal aspect of the story, but really, It's because when it comes to these big historical moments and battles, they are shown as a full sequence, and everything in between has this edited down quality to it that makes it feel less important. Except that you can also tell that there was an attempt there to show Napoleon as a complicated figure, someone who was a brilliant military man and a leader who inspired people to follow him, for better or for worse, but also someone whose ego eventually led him to making very costly mistakes. And on top of that, someone who was torn in his personal life between what was expected of him and what he actually wanted, while also potentially being pretty awkward and insecure. All of that just needed more room to breathe. And honestly, in an ideal world, this should have been a very expensive miniseries because aside from the choppy personal stuff and setup, we're also missing a few other major battles. Speaking of which, I have to give you a warning. A lot of horses perish in this movie. Some pretty obviously, one in a very graphic way. Very graphic. So just be aware of that. Here's the complicated thing about recommending Napoleon. In its theatrical cut, it's a pretty flawed film, and while I haven't seen the 4-hour director's cut, which will eventually be available on Apple TV+, I have a feeling, even though it's a lot longer, it flows better and solves at least some of the issues I had. So in that case, it makes sense to tell you to wait for the streaming release. However, it's definitely a movie made for the big screen experience. It's epic, the production design is gorgeous, the battle scenes are fantastic. It's a shame not to watch it in theaters, but unfortunately, your only option there is the heavily edited version. While I'm personally glad I got to experience it on the big screen, I can't give it a must-watch recommendation for you to go and spend your money on it, and I really wish there was some limited theatrical run of the 4-hour version with an intermission, because I would definitely go see that. But that's not what we have here, so you decide how important it is for you to go see a flawed epic on the big screen, and probably walk away from it feeling like you would have preferred to see the 4-hour version instead. Finally, I have saved the best for last. Let's talk about Maestro. Directed, starring, and co-written by Bradley Cooper, who apparently also spent 6 years learning how to conduct for this movie because the man clearly had a vision here. Maestro is a cinematic portrait of Leonard Bernstein with a big focus on his relationship with his wife, Felicia Montealegre. I really enjoyed this movie. I'm so glad this isn't some stiff by-the-numbers biopic, and I really appreciated how much fun Bradley Cooper had with this as a director and as a performer, of course, but the way he plays with the presentation of the story is a lot of fun to watch. Maestro pretty much morphs from one genre to another along the way. The movie starts as this whirlwind of a classic Hollywood romance, black and white, high energy, transatlantic accents. It sweeps you off your feet, and it's so full of life, passion, and creativity. At first glance, it might feel a little surface level in the first act, but when you look closer, a lot of the storytelling is visual, and there are subtle ways in which the movie sets up its themes and what's going to lead to big emotional payoff later in the film. One of the not so subtle examples of this, which you can see in the trailer, is that shot of Felicia literally standing in the giant shadow of Bernstein as he's conducting. Just one fantastic shot that conveys part of their dynamic so well. However, by the time we get to the third act, the movie has transformed into a full-on grounded personal drama that still makes some callbacks to the first act, but uses them in a different way. Gone are the classic Hollywood style and the flying camera transitions, and the passion for creativity now feels like a need tinged with what almost feels like a desperation to live authentically and hang on to the people who are important, to what makes life worth living. The movie is about the emotional complexity of being an artist, of balancing a public image with honesty and with family, the contradictions Leonard Bernstein had dealt with during his life. But also, so much of this movie is about the joy of doing what you love, and as a viewer, you feel a bit of that euphoria as you watch Bernstein conduct. Well, Bradley Cooper as Leonard Bernstein, but to his credit, he disappears into this role, and I quickly forgot I was watching Bradley Cooper. So let's talk about the performances. Cooper is fantastic, and while he has delivered some impressive performances throughout his career, this one is definitely my favorite. Recency bias? Maybe a little bit, but this is such a powerful, transformative, fearless performance that I stand by it being his best to date. The actual conducting is mesmerizing, and while it might seem a bit over the top, if you look at actual footage of Bernstein conducting, it's pretty close. The man did conduct with his whole body. And while we're on the topic of conducting, the movie absolutely puts beautiful music front and center here. I'm not going to lie, the big scene where he conducts Mahler is so intense and stunning, I had to fight my own body not to applaud at the end of it. It's amazing. But as much as Maestro belongs to Bradley Cooper, by the third act, it's Carey Mulligan's movie. I mean, she is something else, and the depth of her performance really comes through as you get further into the film. Her and Cooper have amazing chemistry. You absolutely get how complicated this relationship was and how deeply the two were connected. Just like I can't imagine anyone else playing Bernstein at this point, I also can't imagine any other actress playing Felicia, and the two of them play off each other so well. Her story is a complex one as well, and at one point she mentions having the arrogance to think she could survive on what he could give, which not only speaks about her character, but also connects back to Bernstein and having to balance his passion for music, his public persona, and his family. On that note, they also have amazing arguments, not only from the writing perspective, because yes, they are very raw and honest, but also from the performance perspective. People constantly talking over each other and inserting verbal jabs in the most realistic way possible. While I may have some small issues with the film here and there, whether it skims over certain things or takes certain liberties or just feels a little bit too Hollywood in certain parts, I don't think there's anything worth making into a big deal. I've also heard the makeup complaints, and I don't really see the issue here. Yes, he is wearing prosthetics, but if I'm comparing pictures with the real Leonard Bernstein, I think they did a pretty impressive job, so the controversy seems blown out of proportion to me. Lots of actors portraying real people wear prosthetics. At just over 2 hours, the movie pretty much flies by. It's memorable, it's sincere, it's beautifully shot, the performances are outstanding, it leaves you on a high, and it gives you some food for thought. Listen, it's not complicated. I'm an emotional viewer, and if I watch a beautifully made movie that leaves me thinking and stirs some strong feelings, I'm going to love it, and I'm going to be willing to overlook small flaws because as a cohesive piece of cinema, in my book, it did its job. On top of that, this is a massive step forward for Bradley Cooper as a director, and I'm definitely looking forward to his future films. My suggestion, of course, is for you to go see and hear Maestro on the big screen during its limited theatrical run, which is starting right now before it gets on Netflix, because it is absolutely worth the price of admission. It's easily the best out of the 3 biopics I'm talking about today, and in my opinion, one of the best movies of the year.